Hey everyone, this is Mike. Today I wanted to take the time to talk about door bosses, because in our newest Savage raid tier we do have another door boss. We have Eden's Promise guarding the gates to the Oracle of Darkness, and when we first heard about there being another door boss, I do believe a couple of people in our community were a little bit scared, myself included, because door bosses in Savage hasn't really been handled all that great in the past. Now I'm only going to be talking about Savage because when we look at, for example, Ruby Weapon and Emerald Weapon, they technically also have a door boss, but I do believe that one is also present inside normal mode. So when you do the normal mode for those fights, I do believe you get both of the phases. Whereas when we look at the raids, specifically that have a door boss, when you do normal mode, you only get to do the door boss, and the second boss that you fight in those fights is Savage exclusive. Now, of course, you can go and talk about how there shouldn't be any Savage exclusive fights or whatever. Personally, I don't mind it that it's Savage exclusive. It's basically kind of like a reward for people that are willing to put in the time and effort that they can get an extra boss fight, and that is also something that a lot of people have been asking for, right? A lot of people think that 4 bosses for a raid tier is not enough, so there being technically 2 bosses to fight in the final fight makes it so that you have a raid tier that now has 5 bosses, even though you only get loot 4 times and not 5 times, but then again, that doesn't really bother all that much. However, even though that we get that extra boss that a lot of people have been asking for in the past, a lot of people don't like door bosses, and not specifically because we just now have to fight that extra boss, but because the second phase usually isn't really handled all that well. And for that I need to go back to Stormblood, because that is where door bosses were first introduced. 04 Savage, XDev transforming into Neo XDev, then we had Kefka going into God Kefka, and then last but not least Omega MNF transforming into the final Omega. Now with this I don't mean to say that the second phases are bad by any means, because like all 3 of those fights, Neo XDev, God Kefka as well as final Omega, have been a lot of fun, but they're not perfect. There are a couple of glaring issues with them. God Kefka, for example, to this date is still one of my favorite fights in the game, but there is still an issue in that fight as well, and that is a very simple reason of repeating mechanics. They don't feel as if they are complete fights, so to speak. So because there is a door boss, of course, that is kind of going to be adding to the amount of mechanics that are in said specific fight, and because of that the door boss was usually pretty short, and because they wanted to make the second fight a full-length Savage fight, they had to just start implementing repeating mechanics. When we look at Neo XDev, once you hit the 50% mark where he does Grand Cross Omega, everything past that is just going to be a repeat of what you saw in the first half of the fight. When it comes down to God Kefka, it wasn't as bad, because you have 3 different Forsakens, but then once you hit that 4th Forsaken, it is an exact copy of the 3rd one. So again, it's kind of like, why was that 4th one added there? They should have just finished the fight at the 3rd Forsaken instead. And then when we look at final Omega, we have a similar scenario as Neo XDev, where you go into Hello World 2, and once that mechanic is done, it is just repeat mechanics of what we had seen before. And that kind of ruined the experience for me a little bit, because for me a fight should evolve over the course that you are fighting it, with mechanics that evolve as well. And you might see some things coming back, like for example a Tangbuster or something like that. Or even, for example, when we look at the Oracle of Darkness, she basically does 2 main mechanics, but they just keep evolving on those 2 mechanics as well throughout the course of the fight, still making it feel like a complete experience. And that is something that we didn't get back in Stormblood, because it was just repeating mechanics that we had already seen before, without innovating on those mechanics by adding extra things to it, or maybe like putting a twist on those mechanics or something like that, whereas that is something that they do in the new E12s fights. And because of that, I do think that E12s is basically the perfect iteration of what a door boss fight should look like. When we look at Eden's Promise, it is its own fight with its own unique mechanics that works from the beginning to the end. At the start of the fight, they show you how the primal mechanics are going to work. You have these 2 unique phases with Shiva and Titan, then there are more primal mechanics built upon together with some new mechanics that we hadn't seen yet, like with the statues, with the lions. Then we also learn the stock and release mechanic, and then that comes together in the final mechanic where she does stock, release, cast, as well as some other things in between as well, which makes it a pretty good door boss fight in my opinion. And then when we go into the Oracle of Darkness, the second phase of that fight, it is yet again a pretty cool fight. At the beginning she shows you that she is going to do some time mechanics, This of course is a little bit of a look back at E2 Savage, because E2 Savage we had Voidwalker. Technically Gaia was inside Voidwalker, so if you haven't followed the story, that's basically where that came from. So it's kind of normal that she has time mechanics as well. And the first two real time mechanics she does with the Dark Water and the Dark Fire, I believe it is called, are exact copies from E2 Savage, but I don't really mind them being there because it's kind of like a drawback of, look, I'm technically the same boss that you fought back then, but back then I wasn't aware, I was asleep or something like that. It's been a while, don't remember the whole story, but anyways, it's really cool that they made that reference. And past that, you basically build upon these things, like she shows you some of the mechanics. These mechanics will be coming back in a different form during the relativity mechanics. Then you also have the apocalypse mechanics that again evolve throughout the fight as well, with it just being a single at the first one, then double, then triple at the end. And the way you handle those mechanics will also change, and there will also be different mechanics that are going to be thrown together with these apocalypse mechanics as well, meaning that it stays fresh. And so both of these fights are their own Savage boss, but they still feel very unique and feel very complete as well, which is something that I didn't really feel with the previous fights that we had back in Stormblood. So if they ever do another door boss fight again, by all means look back at what you did with E12 Savage and build upon what you did right there, because both of the fights, even though they are quote-unquote short for a Savage fight, they are their own boss in their own respective way. And maybe this could lead into there being 5 bosses into the next Savage raid tier or something as well. When we go into 6.0, I know that some people don't necessarily like there being a door boss, because now technically your fourth fight is 2 bosses instead of just having to beat 1 and you get your loot. I personally don't mind it because we just get an extra Savage boss to fight. And of course I do enjoy Savage raids quite a lot, it's my favorite thing to do in this game. So us having an extra boss to fight is definitely an upside for me. But let me know what you think about these door bosses. Do you think that normal mode should get their own kind of normal mode raid boss as well of the second phase that right now is Savage exclusive? Do you like there being door bosses? Do you think that they handled it way better this time around than what they did back in Stormblood? Let me know in the comments down below. Quite curious to see what you guys think about all of that. But with that being said, I want to thank you for watching. I want to thank my Patreons for supporting me, and I'll see you in the next one.